Today's workshop formed part of an initiative that aims to unite Africa's conservation community in the fight against invasive plants. Supported by the JRS Biodiversity Foundation and led by Leadership for Conservation Africa's Share Screen Africa initiative, the program will share expertise, build skills, and turn biodiversity data into practical action to manage invasive plants. A special thank you to Jackson and the team at Parliament Conservancy, providing their landscape as a living case study for us to learn from. A quick commercial break. If you are considering visiting Kenya, I really recommend that you visit community conservancies like Laikipia and Parliament. You will have a far more interesting experience and at the same time supporting cutting-edge conservation work. The Wildlife Tourism College also offers beautiful safari tents for a close-to-nature experience. I really recommend that you support these institutions where you can. Then, looking at today's workshop, where we look at prickly pear and common thorn apple. Students, you may wonder why we would dedicate a workshop to the control of these two species. What is the big deal? After all, the prickly pear provides us with fences and tasty fruit. In a recent study by Cabby, the authors argue that current costs associated with the loss of forage growing under and near Opuntia stricta plants, which is inaccessible to livestock in Eastern Africa, are at the moment estimated at $244.6 million and will amount to $18 billion in Kenya over the next 50 years if not controlled effectively. Think about that for a moment. The grass under these plants, under Opuntia stricta, that cattle, goats, and sheep can't reach, the cost to the loss of that currently amounts to $244.6 million. Imagine the kind of infrastructure projects that you can run with that. So one of the most patriotic things that you could do for your country could be to stop the spread of these plants. And that's not even mentioning the suffering they cause to animals that consume their fruit. The thing about invasive plants is that they almost sneak into your reserve while you as conservancy manager are paying attention to human-wildlife conflict, budgets, and many other urgent issues. When you notice them, it's almost too late. The good news is that when we have the tools to regain our habitats and our ecosystems. Today is all about equipping you with the necessary skills. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Kirsten. Kirsten, over to you.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Johan, and welcome everyone to today's workshop on invasive alien plants. Okay, so I would like to just take you through a little tour of our speakers for today. We have an amazing panel of experts. We begin together with Dr. Emily Wabuyele, and she's going to give us a big picture look at invasive plants in East Africa. Then we're going to go on to Jackson Sassine. We journey to the Parliament Conservancy in the Mara in Kenya and hear about the two key invasive alien plant species that are threatening this conservation area. Then Professor Llewellyn Foxcroft will guide us through management strategies used in protected areas elsewhere. Gustave Leroux will talk with us about the underlying causes of invasive alien plant spread and integrated management. David Harding will introduce chemical control of invasive alien plants. And Peter Matenge and Mohammed Shibia will introduce Laikipia Wildlife Forum's approach to the control of the dominant invasive alien plant, Opuntia stricta. And with that, I'm going to move on to our first speaker, Dr. Emily Wabuyele. She's a botanist and a lecturer at Kenyatta University, whose research focuses on the ecology and management of invasive alien plants in East Africa. She's widely recognized for advancing regional knowledge that supports biodiversity conservation and sustainable ecosystem management. In this presentation, Emily will examine the growing threat that invasive alien plants pose to East Africa and Kenya's biodiversity, protected areas, agriculture, and rural livelihoods, exploring their biology, ecology, and impacts. Emily, please go ahead. We are all ears.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. As you've already been told, I am Emily Wabuyele, lecturer at the Kenyatta University, Plant Sciences Department in Kenya. And I take this opportunity to thank the organizers for inviting me to speak to the team about invasive plants in Kenya, in East Africa, with emphasis on Kenya. So my talk is on the introduction to invasive plant species, their distribution, a little bit about the impact, and I'll end with giving some case studies. So the objective of this talk is actually to distinguish or explain what invasive species are, how species get invasive, and the factors that promote invasiveness. I will briefly look at the ecological and economic impact of invasive species. Present a little about the current status of plant invasions in East Africa, and the two case studies will be on Datura stramonium and Opuntia stricta. So on this slide, I present some of the species that are recognized as being invasive in East Africa. We see lantana, we see agemon, we see Datura, and Nicotiana glauca on the slide. Now, in trying to understand invasiveness, plant invasiveness, I would like us to step back and think about the factors that influence plant populations in their habitat. Most specifically, their native range. Now, for each and every plant species or even animal species, their populations are always influenced by resource availability. And in resources, we are looking at the amount of light, water, etc. We're looking at the way the species interact with other species, both in terms of intra and interspecific competition. We look at herbivory, or what animals are feeding on the species, the diseases and pathogens, and intrinsically the reproductive ability of species. So at the end of the day, in any habitat, the population structure, the population behavior of plants is influenced by those various factors, which at the end of the day will keep populations in check. And ecologically, every habitat, every ecosystem is known to have a carrying capacity, which when exceeded, then the plants are said to be, getting invasive. So there is an age or size structure which is influenced by all these factors in nature. Now, then we come to the idea of what is an invasive species. And we emphasize here the fact that all species have got a natural range. Within the natural range, then the species are said to be indigenous. So all species that occur within their natural range will be referred to as either indigenous or native species. So the ecosystem that we have looked at before, where all factors are interacting to keep species in range, is within the native range. And so once species are relocated from their natural range, and this relocation can either be accidental or intentional. In this slide on the left, on the right, we see species being moved from their natural ecosystem, maybe by whatever means, maybe by plane or by ship, they are relocated to a new location well outside their natural range. And in that case, then the species becomes new. It becomes exotic in the new location outside its range. And in that case, then it's referred to an exotic, non-native, or exotic species. So in that way, accidentally or intentionally, species are relocated from their natural range into completely new locations. So that species becomes introduced. Now, so in the new environment, introduced species can go all the way to become invasive, or they may not become invasive depending first on the environmental conditions, the habitat, and then the intrinsic characteristics of the species in terms of their reproductive ability. So an introduced species at the next level can become naturalized, so that a naturalized species is a non-native species or an introduced species that starts establishes self-sustaining populations in the wild without any human assistance. So a species moves from being introduced, being exotic, to being naturalized, and eventually, if it is successful, then it can become invasive in that location. So by becoming invasive, it means that the species then becomes a nuisance. It establishes and spreads very rapidly and causes ecological, economic, and social harm in the new locality. So at the end of the day, then we have indigenous species which are non-native, which are native. Then we have the exotic species, naturalized species, and then alien invasive species, which refers to species that have come from elsewhere and cause harm in the new locations. Now, so we have all these levels from introduction to arrival in the new environment, which is well outside the range, to establishment, spread, and inversion. And there are various processes or factors that promote that kind of possibility. Yeah. So from the introduction point of view, of course, the species has got to be in the right place. In the right place, be vulnerable to being relocated. It should be in a place where it is possible for it to be carried either intentionally or non-intentionally. And the key factors include, for example, people carrying species from maybe one continent or the next for horticultural purposes, for trade, for agriculture. And this kind of relocation is possible due to maybe lack of surveillance at the border points, because the people responsible are not watching in the right directions. Now, two, for establishment, then the species has got to be able to, first of all, respond to the new environment in a vibrant way. The species has got to be able to be tolerant to the conditions in the new locations. Now, for spread, again, the species has got to have good dispersal ability and be able to be either transported by animals, by water, by air. And at the end of the day, then it can become invasive and, of course, cause the kind of harm that we talk about. Now, so the common characteristics of invasive species include high reproductive capabilities, both sexually and asexually or vegetatively. In terms of seed, very high amounts of seed, and even the vegetative growth can happen very rapidly. They have to be fast growing. They have to have high dispersal ability, and be very adaptive to various environments, high tolerance levels, and also be ecological generally, so that they can have, they are not specialists in their requirements of the ecosystem. Now, so I want to illustrate I want to remove something that is blocking my way. Yeah, I want to illustrate the impacts of invasive plants in their new environment based on giving an example of Parthenium hysterophorus, which is a species that has gained a lot of mileage in terms of invasion in East Africa in the recent years. Yeah, so Parthenium hysterophorus is arrived in Kenya in the 50s, and it is assumed that it came alongside seed or whatever agricultural chemicals that were used in the coffee industry, and so it arrived in the coffee farms somewhere around Nairobi, during that time. Now, once the species arrived here, remember that in its natural range, then it had enemies, it had pathogens that kept it in check. But once it arrived here, then there was nothing to keep it in check, and it started spreading. Originally or initially very slowly, but then because nothing was eating it, it started establishing. And here at the first level, we see that because it has very high competitive abilities, high levels of seeding, it started spreading all around, replacing the native vegetation. So in terms of habitat, then Parthenium was able to take over most of the habitats, displacing the natural vegetation. And in terms of biodiversity terms, then we see a lot of monocultures of Parthenium, where monocultures of Parthenium where it grows. Therefore, there's less and less habitat for the other plants. Now, Parthenium is also known to have some allelopathic characteristics, in which case then it produces chemicals that suppress growth of other species around it. And therefore, at the end of the day, the biodiversity gets less and less. Even the soil biota gets less and less in the ecosystem. We have also observed that in agricultural fields, maize fields or whatever, wheat, Parthenium is growing as a weed, and therefore at the end of the day, farmers are using more and more time to weed out, more investment, and also less harvest, because again, there's competition for nutrients. And Parthenium is also known to have some adverse effects for people who have issues with the respiratory health. Some people are allergic. It causes contact dermatitis. So again, it is a problem. So there's a big impact on human health and also animal health. And in some places like Ethiopia, where we had some real examples during the research, we saw that when the animals consumed Parthenium together with the pastures, the milk palatability was less, and it also affected the yield. So in that case, then economic losses were witnessed. Again, in some cases, because there's so much litter in the ecosystem, it is possible that fires will feature very prominently on the landscape. Fires which would otherwise not be as severe or as frequent. So at the end of the day, invasive species like Parthenia cause havoc to a whole lot of things, starting from agriculture, health, and the whole lot of economic setup. So where are we in terms of global statistics? There are many alien species that have been introduced. Generally, it's about 37,000 species have been reported to have been relocated from their initial localities and taken to others. But at the end of the day, only about 3,500 are considered to be invasive in their new places. So those 3,500 species, of course, mainly they have been documented in Europe, North America, and it's estimated that about 60% of extinctions that have been witnessed have been contributed by the presence of invasive species, and just about 16% have been solely been driven by invasive species. In economic terms, lots of money, in excess of 423 billion US dollars are usually lost, and that's an estimate from 2019 due to invasive species. It is also observed that these losses quadruple every decade since the 1970s, and that due to the various losses that have been listed in the previous slides. Now, so as I've said, Africa has witnessed so far fewer invasions. Just about 70% have been of the total invasions have been documented so far. But again, because of the reliance of a lot of people in Africa on nature, on their biodiversity, this is a very significant percentage when you look at it in terms of interrupted livelihoods. Now, so having given general background about invasiveness generally, then let us look a little more on invasions in East Africa. And East Africa is, of course, occupies the easternmost region of the African continent. In a broad sense, it runs all the way from Eritrea in the north to Tanzania in the south, and then DRC, Rwanda, Burundi in the west. So that is in the broad sense, and in the it's bordered to the east by the Indian Ocean. Now, in the narrow sense of what we are going to talk about, what I'm going to present about, I'm talking about East Africa, including Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, mostly because the flora in this region has always been studied together, and we share a lot of ecosystems, including historical colonial records or colonial history. So a lot of the floristic tasks have been done together. So East Africa, in this sense, will focus on Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. Now, in terms of ecoclimatic zonation, here I present very broadly 6 ecological zones, zone 1 to 6, where we have the humid highland regions, mostly in the high peaks of East Africa, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania. Then we have Zone B, Zone 2, of rainfall about 1,000 to 1,500. It's usually warm and moist. We have a bit of that in Kenya, but a lot of it is in Uganda and Tanzania. Then the semi-humid, where there's moderate rainfall. We have a bit of it in Kenya, more of it in Uganda and Tanzania. Zone 4, semi-arid, we have a lot of that in Kenya, meaning that Kenya is most of the areas are semi-arid. Then Zone 4, the arid, occurs mostly in Kenya again. And lastly, we have the coastal or marine kind of environment, which is predominantly in Kenya and Tanzania, at the Kenya and Tanzania coastal areas, because Uganda is landlocked. Now, so in terms of vegetation, if you think about coming from the high peaks all the way to the Indian Ocean, the climate and the vegetation are influenced mostly by the altitude and, of course, the temperatures. So we have the alpine zones, then the moorlands, then the mountain forests, which are some of the most important forests, and then the highland zones where there's plenty of agricultural activity. Then we get to our lower altitudes, mainly where we have our woodlands and the bushlands, the semi-arid zone. And then eventually we get to the Indian Ocean, which has got a warm and humid influence from the Indian Ocean. So the vegetation patterns in East Africa will usually reflect a lot on these kinds of zonation. Now, so in terms of biodiversity, we are rich in East Africa, but it is uneven just by looking at the kind of factors that control the vegetation patterns. And generally, there's decline in biodiversity due to habitat loss and degradation. And of course, we have also felt the impacts of climate change that is increasing by day, lots of flooding, lots of drought. And invasive species have been observed to be on the rise. So in a way, they also influence the habitats. And of course, at the habitats, they also have got their own specific influences. So at the end of the day, there've been a lot of conservation and restoration efforts in some of our ecosystems, which is giving hope to the ecosystems. Now, in terms of invasions, then East Africa is growing kind of economy. We are all trying to open it up for trade. We are trying to open it up to build the infrastructure. Therefore, there's a lot of coming and going, which is very which is attractive, or which promotes invasive species. Again, we have lots of livestock, free-range livestock, which again are agents of spread of invasive species. And of course, the climate is not too extreme in many areas, so a lot of species can establish easily. And of course, widespread habitat disturbance. Now, so we have quite a bit of invasive species, and there's this link that I have put here. If you click on it, so then maybe some 10 years ago, we came up with a list of some of the species that have been recorded for the area. So just about 120 species have been recorded as being invasive in the region, all the way starting from Acacia meansi they are listed alphabetically. Now I want to go back to my slideshow. Hello.
Hi, Emily. You can just close the web page that opened. You can just close it, and it should bring you back to us on Zoom.
Okay, let me see that. I can just close it. Okay.
Okay, then you can just go back to slideshow mode. So I think you were on slide 17. You were on slide 17.
Oh yes, and then I should have told you to just let me know if I've done half of my time so that I know how fast I should go.
So you are on half of you have 30 minutes left.
How many?
30 minutes left.
30.
30, yes.
All right.
Yeah. So you're on slide 17.
Are we back to the presentation?
Yeah, you just need to put it in slideshow mode again. So if you just go to slide 17, because that's where you were, and
Actually,
just put it in.
I'm still here on slide mode.
Okay, I think just press are you? Yes, there we go. So just slide 17.
17.
So it says status of invasion in East Africa. The next one is a map.
Yeah.
There we go.
Are we there?
Yes. Thank you so much, Emily.
We're on slide mode. Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, so we have quite a bit of invasive species, and that link, it is online, you can access it for your use. Now, so in terms of biodiversity, I just also need to mention that 3 of the global biodiversity hotspots occur in our region. We have the Eastern Afro-Montane biodiversity hotspot, which is marked by a green that has got a corresponding wherever on the map. Please look at it. So we have the Eastern Afro-Montane biodiversity hotspots, which is mainly centered on our high upland vegetation or ecoclimatic zone. Then we have the coastal forests of Eastern Africa biodiversity hotspot, which is mainly associated with the coastal forests of Kenya and Tanzania. Then we have the Horn of Africa biodiversity hotspot, which is centered on the arid ecosystems in northern Kenya, then Ethiopia and Somalia. So at the end of the day, our biodiversity hotspots have not been spared of the invasive species. So there are reports, there's documentation that they are also being invaded. Now, so in terms of the invasive species that have been witnessed, I just present here some of our various ecosystems that have been affected by whatever invasive species, starting from the rangelands and savannas, which of course are very extensive in the region due to the fact that especially Kenya, it's mainly dryland. So we have lots of Prosopis juliflora, Opuntia stricta, Lantana camara, Parthenium hysterophorus is really gaining a lot of traction in those areas. But the rangelands and savannas also, I should mention that have got lots of the more perennial invasive species. Then we have the agricultural landscapes, which are mainly in the high potential areas. Again, Parthenium is there, Tithona diversifolia, Chromalina, Leucaena, Leucocephala, all those are species that have been frequently been associated with agricultural landscapes. Then in our forests, again, we have the more woody invaders, the Lantana camara, Acacia miansai, Chromalina, and then Leucaena leucocephala. Riparian ecosystems, again, we have Prosopis juliflora, Acacia, Parthenium, etc., etc. And I should mention the wetlands and the freshwater ecosystems, especially Lake Victoria and the other Rift Valley lakes have been affected heavily by the Econia crassipes, the water hyacinth. Salvinia moresta has also been observed in some of the water systems. And of course, our protected areas have got Punta Stricta, they have Lantana Camara, and many others. But the list here includes some of the top invaders in our region in the listed ecosystems. Now, so in terms of specifics for invasion patterns in East Africa, we have filtered out invasive plants records from GBIF data, and this is what we came up with in terms of distribution. So here we come, the intensity of color here corresponds to, intensity of records or intensity of invasion that has been recorded. And so for Uganda, you observe that Uganda displays the most widespread and continuous hotspot patterns in East Africa, mainly because, again, Uganda is mainly a wet country. There's plenty of rainfall throughout the year, so the plants respond in a way that they have plenty of resources. So the invasion is even more. And if you look at the patterns, it's much more continuous than it is in Kenya and Tanzania. So mostly you have western and southwestern Uganda, which has got extensive clusters of high invasions, and also the borders with the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda. There's quite a bit of hotspots in terms of invasion. Central Uganda, again, including the Lake Victoria Basin, again, responds to the amount of moisture that is witnessed in that area. But northern Uganda generally is less invaded because, again, the amount of moisture, the amount of dryness there limits the invasion levels. When it comes to Tanzania, you have a lot of invasion, especially at the border with Kenya. So, but generally, Tanzania has got a more heterogeneous distribution. It's not so much lumped. The hotspots are not so much lumped in one area. In the northern region, particularly around the borders with Kenya, it is a real hotspot, as you can see from the intensity of the color. The eastern coastal districts, again, there's high intensity. Again, that is the area that is bordering the Indian Ocean, so it's very highly moist, and there's good rainfall throughout the year. And then central and southern Tanzania, it's not as invaded as it is as the rest of the country. Now, coming to Kenya, you have highest concentrations in central, southern, and southeastern counties, which again corresponds to places where a lot of the population is found, a lot of people are there. There's that is where again there's high agricultural activity. Then the southern rangelands, Kajiado, Narok, for those who are familiar. Again, these are also highly invaded, and then including the coastal areas, which, as I have said, similarly to Tanzania, neighbor the Indian Ocean. Now, in the northern part, that is where aridity is high. Again, the hotspots are not as hot. Probably we can say they are warm spots of invasion. Again, because of the limitations of water availability and, of course, unreliable rainfall in the north. So generally, the hotspots in East Africa, hotspots of invasion are concentrated in areas with high human activity, where they are densely populated, where we have transport corridors, of course, we have agents, frequent agents of spread and rapidly urbanizing regions. And again, because of high potential availability of rain, the highland and subhumid ecoclimatic zones tend to have more hotspots than the arid and semi-arid landscapes. And also then the border regions. The border regions, as we have seen, Uganda, no, Tanzania and Kenya is really hot. And then the area, Uganda, Congo, Rwanda, the borders are really infested. And at the end of the day, the protected areas that we have in the region, especially those that are neighboring agricultural and pastoral landscape, also are invaded. So they have not been spared. Now, I just want to take you through a pictorial of some of the invasive species that we have. Maybe you could see one or two that you know. We have Azolla pinnata. This is also referred to as mosquito fan. It is, of course, it invades water systems. Azedracta indica, what we call marubaini, like it cures 40 types of diseases. It is popular in East Africa. It is used medicinally, but it's invasive. Catharanthus roseus, this is from Madagascar, the Madagascan periwinkle. Again, I understand it's medicinal, and it's very attractive. So you can see that people must have wanted to have it in their gardens, in their homes. And this is how it was spread. Prosopis juliflora, the mesquite plant, which popularly referred to as madenge in Kenya. I think madenge was an invader, but it causes a lot of havoc to the ecosystems, the pastures. People are not able to graze their animals freely, and when the animals, the goats eat them, then I hear they get problems with their teeth, and sometimes the thorns are edged in their systems. Ricinus communis is a very helpful plant. In our region, there are many families that would use it in terms of fuel for lighting. But again, it is listed as one of the invasive species. The Tithonia, the Mexican sunflower, is invasive, very heavily invasive in most of abandoned fields, abandoned homesteads. In the higher potential areas. Cesium vulgare, the bull's thistle, is really spreading. Many years ago, or not very many years ago, maybe 10, there wasn't much of it, but now I see it everywhere that I travel. Lantana camara has been here with us for a long time, and yeah, so it has its own advantages. There are people who would never do away with it, because first of all, from the children, the fruits can be eaten, and in that way, actually, they are spread from place to place. And there are people who say it is a really good plant because they also use it medicinally. Then Salvinia molesta, again, this is a water invader. Penicetum, a fountain grass. It is very beautiful, and I have seen it grown in many gardens, even along highways. Nicotiana glauca, the tree tobacco. Again, it is spreading very quickly, especially on the way to in Kajiado, in Narok counties. It's spreading very quickly. Opuntia monacantha and its relatives are also here. Opuntia stricta, which we will look at later. The Opuntia coccinifera, that is also here. And yeah, actually, 2 weeks ago, I was in the field and I actually witnessed people eating fruits of this Opuntia. So in that way, I think they will keep spreading, because I think originally not many people in this part of the world were eating this Opuntia fruits, but now people have discovered they are a delicacy and they will keep spreading. Then we have the Bryophyllum elaguense, the mother of millions, which of course is very, very highly adapted. As you can see, the small babies on each of those fingerlets. It germinates and ready to take off once it touches the ground. So very, very promising invasive. Then you have this Madeira vine, which has also spread, particularly in the higher potential areas, the highlands. Then our water hyacinth, unfortunately, is still with us. People are using it for all sorts of basketry, etc. And I have seen people selling it around Nairobi and other places. Pistia stratioides, the water lettuce, is also here. Yeah, so those are some of the invasive plants that we have. And they are on the list that I showed, 120 species that were invasive or were documented to be invasive by the year 2012, I think. Now, so I would like us to just look a little at the case studies of Pontia stricta and Datura stramonium, just to demonstrate from what we have said generally about invasive species. So what is in these two species that makes them so invasive here, and probably how get into how then we can be able to eradicate them. Yeah, so Opuntia stricta is erect, up to about 3 meters tall. As you can see, it has cladodes that are flattened. That is how you identify it. It has very vicious spines and the so-called glogits that usually penetrate your skin when you touch it. It has bright yellow flowers. It has when the fruits are ready, they are rounded. They are red to purple. And this plant, as you can see, is very well adapted to little water or dry ecosystems. It has many ways of protecting itself. Because it's succulent, it protects itself from herbivores, from being eaten, and in that way, it passes on to to the next generation. Now, so it's highly tolerant of drought and poor soils. And once these cladodes are detached, they can easily root and take off and grow to the next level. If they're broken, if these cladodes are broken, either accidentally or willfully, they will be transported very easily by machinery, and new plants will easily establish in their new localities. And again, the amount of flowers that are produced are very, very many. And of course, fruits and flowers are a means of reproduction. So that is the high reproductive ability that we talked about. And the fact that the fruits are edible, again, aids the plant in dispersal, so that you and me, animals, when they eat them, they are able to scatter them around, and therefore they spread. Now, presently, again, from GBIF data, this is the kind of distribution that we see in East Africa. We have, it follows this very similar patterns. There's plenty of it in Kenya, plenty of it in Tanzania, but as you can see, there's not as much of this species as in Uganda. Again, maybe just corresponding to the amount of aridity in each of the countries. So this Punja stricta mainly affects, is more rampant in Tanzania and Kenya, at least by the data that exists at present. So of course, it's a beautiful plant. It was introduced for purposes of ornamental purposes, for hedging, because if you have a hedge of them, then it's vicious. There will be no intruders that will be that will get into your property or wherever. And of course, the fruit production in some areas, there are juices that are made out of their fruits. So because of its adaptation to the kind of ecosystems that exist in East Africa, so much of our rangelands are already invaded, including conservation areas and, of course, our pastures. So at the end of the day, like we said, the habitat for native vegetation is reduced. It is actually modified. Some of the species cannot survive in the presence of this kind of invaders. So far, just to be very particular on the areas that have been reported to be invaded, we have southeastern Kenya, particularly these areas of Tsavo East, Tsavo West National Parks, Taita Taveta County. They are very heavily invaded by this plant. In the Rift Valley, Baringo County, it's extensive, mostly around the rangelands again, and the low-lying areas. Central rangelands in Laikipia County have also been highly affected, and I understand there will be someone who will be speaking about this. I think there's been a bit of work that has been done in Laikipia on this species. Northern Kenya, Samburu County, Isiolo. Yeah, again, of course, because of the aridity in the north, the populations are still a bit localized, but they are expanding. And in due course, we will surely have big invasions. Eastern Kenya, counties of Kitui and Makueni, we have some bushlands and degraded areas that have also been invaded. Then, of course, in coastal Kenya, we have scattered populations, especially in disturbed habitats. Yeah, so much for Opuntia stricta. That is a species that it's perennial. It has mostly affected the rangelands and the other, more arid ecosystems. But moving on to Datura stramonium, which is also Jimson weed or thorn apple. Again, this is slightly, the patterns are slightly different. Here is how the flower looks. And I think it can be distinguished by its green, spiny seed capsules, which I've not shown in this image. It produces numerous flattened black seeds, which again help in dispersal. And here I have illustrated how this species looks especially in abandoned. It's a nutrient loving, high nutrient loving plant. So it thrives in abandoned homesteads, abandoned cow sheds, abandoned, in places which are rich in nutrients. And usually for adaptation, it produces thousands of seeds, and which can easily be spread to different localities. And so presently it invades roadsides, farmlands, abandoned lands, riverbanks, etc., and mostly in the highland and medium altitude agricultural landscape. So mostly this is a weed of agricultural fields. And of course, the kind of damage it causes relates to agricultural productivity and production. Yeah, so this is the kind of distribution it has in the region. You can see that in Uganda, it comes up quite a bit strongly, much more strongly than in Kenya. Again, because it's a moisture-loving, nutrient-loving species. We have more of it in Uganda. Then we have a lot of it in Western Kenya and a bit of northern Tanzania. Yeah, so it is widespread in the highland areas, moisture-rich areas in those places, and mostly responds to disturbance in all those ecosystems. Yeah, so at the end of the day, Datura stramonium disrupts our agriculture, competing with crops for all the essentials, water, nutrients, etc. And so we get less of the yield that is expected. For the animals in agriculture or the livestock, this species actually is said to be toxic to the livestock when it is consumed. But again, the literature says that the animals don't usually eat it until there's scarcity during drought or when it is accidentally mixed with the animal feed. Yeah, so poisoning could occur if that happens. In terms of human health, again, the species is poisonous, and I saw that there are symptoms when people are poisoned. They can have dilated pupils, dry mouth, rapid heartbeat. So it is usually poisonous. It can actually cause death, or they say people could get into coma. Yeah, so I guess these are my conclusions. Based on the survey of the various species that we have looked at, the patterns of invasion in East Africa, the causes of invasion. We see that invasive alien plant species are an increasing threat, escalating threat to East Africa's biodiversity, ecosystem services, and livelihoods. Because, for example, the pastures, in terms of animal feed and pastures, some places are not accessible anymore because of some of the very vicious invasive species like Opuntia stricta. And yeah, so East Africa is getting more and more invaded because of the kind of development, economic development activities that are going on, improving infrastructure, opening up the countries for trade and for all sorts of economic activities. So it's really getting a hotspot, becoming a hotspot. And the first hotspots have been witnessed in areas which are, borderline between countries, maybe signifying the amount of coming and going. Then three, different ecosystems are vulnerable to different invasive species, as we can see. A lot of the very dry ecosystems will not have, let's say, the herbaceous or the less adapted invasive species, but plants like Opuntia stricta will invade those ecosystems, notwithstanding, because they are properly adapted. Then from our case studies, we see two contrasting invasion strategies. The perennial invaders, of course, will be properly adapted to the ecosystems, and they will overstay and outcompete the natural vegetation. The Datura stramonium, on the other hand, loves disturbed areas because it's actually properly adapted to rapidly colonize and outlive the disadvantages of in the habitat. Now, to conclude, we have here, it is the dream of every conservationist to keep out invasive species from their ecosystem. So you see here, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, our wish is that they stay invasive species free. We want to keep out all these invaders from our waters and our drylands, our wetlands, everywhere. So the impact from invasive species actually is real. We are witnessing biodiversity loss. We are witnessing habitat loss, so that we are getting fewer, our native species are getting fewer and fewer. And that is, that portends lost opportunities in terms of ecosystem services, cultural dependency on all those species, because the native species have always been linked to livelihoods. Now, productivity in agriculture and production is being compromised by various weeds, including striga, including Datura stramonium. So that is something that is real for our region. Ecosystems are getting degraded because ecosystems with monoculture of species are not as resilient as diverse ecosystems. So that is a real threat again, and invasive species have got a real impact on human well-being, human economics, and even from the illustration on Parthenium hysterophorus, there is real danger to human health, especially the respiratory respiratory systems. Now, I want to end by saying that even by organizing some of these forums that we are in here, we have the solution. We know the solution. We can come up with solutions. Our solutions will not be a one-fit-all. For every ecosystem, we will need to be very well targeted. We have to be very much on the lookout there. The powers that be need to look out for what is likely to invade our countries, so that we can get into early detection of what has come in. And once we recognize the patterns that, as we have now, we can coordinate our action internally as a country, as a county. For those of us who live in counties in Kenya, we need to be coordinated, but also regionally, because invasive species, just like many other species, are not respecting political boundaries. So we need to work together across political boundaries. And once, we have identified invaded areas, we work on ecosystem restoration for us to be able to restore our ecosystems. So in order to do that, of course, we have the data, we have the intention, but nothing happens without us making an impact on policy for our governments, for our regulators to buy in, to be able to provide resources for us to control invasive species. Of course, the research is here, but we need to innovate ways of managing ecosystems. And scientists and managers alone will not be able to do it. We will need to include communities, and especially in detecting new species. We can employ technology in terms of citizen science for people in those far-flung areas to tell us what has come in, what they have seen that has not been existing in their ecosystem. So that only then can we be able to map out and reach those alien species before they finish our ecosystem. So community participation, local community participation, the managers, the researchers, and all can help us to come up with good solutions that will ensure sustainable management of ecosystems and mitigation of the impacts of the invasive species. I would like to stop there and thank everyone for listening to me. And in coming up with the presentation, of course, I got some help from one of my students with the mapping, with getting all the data from GBIF, and I would like to recognize Joseph. No, he's not called. He's James. James, currently at the University of Oslo. He has been of great help in putting the data together. Thank you very much.
Emily, that was an absolutely amazing presentation. It really was a thorough and fascinating overview of what's happening in East Africa with invasive alien plants, and I really appreciate you sharing all your expertise and your knowledge. It absolutely is a call for action for all of us, and yes, very visual and informative. Thank you so much. And I actually had several questions, but you actually answered all of them as you went through your presentation. The last one that I was going to ask you was about whether there is currently a national and regionally coordinated management plans and efforts, and whether there's funding for this, but you have actually answered that. And yes, and you gave us a really good insight into Pontius stricta, and that leads us into Jackson's talk. But before that, I'm going to ask my colleague Johan Kruger to ask a question. He mentioned that he did have one. Johan, you're welcome.
Thank you, Emily, for a fantastic overview of the situation in East Africa. I really appreciated how you drew the line between climate and specific species. So I was just wondering, do you see with climate change, there is currently a lot of talk about the so-called super El Nino, potential so-called super El Nino, and it plays out differently in East Africa than in Southern Africa, for instance. Do you see maybe shifts in the distribution of some of these species, or new species emerge that people can sort of prepare for in their landscapes, maybe before they actually arrive? Just your thoughts on that. Thank you so much.
Definitely. Thank you for that question on distributions and the imminent El Nino. I actually dread what's going to happen if there's going to be El Nino. And I hear it is 90% or 99% confirmed. Flooding is definitely one of the, massive spreader of invasive species. And so that, for example, that has happened before with many species. With if you look at, for example, Parthenia, which we mapped very extensively in some years back. If you go to the Lake Victoria region, which is mostly flat, and usually flooded annually, you could actually follow the flooding patterns and see where the water has been and what is happening in terms of distribution of this species. So definitely we have to think about, the possibility of seeing very new things where they never used to be right after or a few months after the El Nino in this region.
So Benedicta, do you want to go ahead?
Thank you, and thank you, Emily, for the wonderful presentation. Mine is not a question. It was just a kind of a comment to say, Emily, don't you think it's good to invest on biological control, to be more specific, on the southeastern Kenya, where you say the Opuntia stricta has heavily infested the area because chemical control wouldn't be that economically viable? Or have you already invested in biological control in that area?
Thank you, Mudaka, for that question. I have not specifically worked on any of the opunches, but I know that there's biological control that has been introduced on one of the opunches, the cochineal. So that has been happening. I don't know how if any monitoring has been done, how effective it's been, but just to comment on biological control, I think that requires usually some investment in terms of host testing and all that, and it will involve all the regulators so that we can be allowed to proceed. But that, of course, biological control at the end of the day is what would be sustainable in terms of managing this species and many other of the species that are invasive in the region. Thank you.